Okay, let's get started with Chapter 4, Ethical and Human Rights Concerns in Global Health. As always, start with your learning objectives. And there's a couple of key themes here, the ethical and human rights concerns, and that's different views we're going to look at global health. Different treaties, which can be confusing, but you get the idea of starting in 1948, the world really did try to get together and come up with what everyone agrees are human rights. Then the guidelines in research is a good section on that, looking at some good and bad events in human subjects research. And then we talk about ethical principles in decision making, who gets service, who doesn't get service. There's some real ethical issues in global health as we have in the United States. Okay, I've started off on the bottom of this page highlighting for you what the book calls the painful ethical dilemmas in planning, implementing, and measuring research in global health. And sort of sum this up by just thinking who gets health, and another issue that will be throughout this chapter is what is an acceptable level of health and how is that achievable for everyone in the world. I'm going to highlight this chapter for you, talking about from a human rights standpoint. Let's skip down that column a little bit. We talk about a great deal of research in global health and the ethical concerns that come up with it, and the researching poor people. And when you think of that, think about those people who may not have the best representation or can't make their voices heard. I'm going to highlight the bottom paragraph for you. It talks about what the chapter does and lays that out for you, so I'll go ahead and highlight this paragraph as well. Now, here we get into the International Bill of Human Rights, and this whole section deals with where these declarations came from and what they're really saying. And these are summed up in 1 and 2 here. And if you look at this, think how subjective these things are. A standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself, his family. What exactly does that mean? What kind of standard of living is that? Food, clothing, medical care, social services, unemployment issues, sickness, disability, old age. If you had to set a standard around the world, what would that be? And then second one, motherhood and childhood, that's viewed very differently in the different corners of the world, and how important these are to some cultures is the exact opposite in other places. Now, page 73 continues on talking about the different treaties and issues relating to those in human rights. But I'm going to go on over to talk about children and how the world agrees that children are all at risk and they should enjoy the highest standard of health that can be offered to them. Now, we go down here to selected human rights issue. I'm going to highlight a paragraph here for you that talks about the rights-based approach. What rights are we entitled to as humans? That was the big issue, and it talks about this rights-based approach. Looks at global health from a human rights issue. The book doesn't take this because it really is limited. If you look at these 3 bullets, that sort of summarizes what they think the global health view is from a human rights approach. Now, the next section deals with human rights and should we suspend those. So look at this. This is when we talk about quarantining people possibly. We talk about restricting travel. And in today's world, excuse me, should we use technology in this? Should the new high-tech world be used to track individuals with certain diseases and so on? There's a good description starting here with HIV and the history of that, and how rights were denied and still are denied with cases of HIV. And that goes on over through page 75. Now, research on human subjects, definitely an issue with ethics, and there are some eye-opening cases revealed here. If you haven't heard of these, they are somewhat disturbing. So you can look at what happened in Nazi Germany, then what happened back in the United States with the Tuskegee studies, and that flips down on the next page to what happened with the first trials with the AZT drugs. So spend some time with those. You might want to skim those a couple of times and really look at some details in there. They are landmark cases that have set standards now, trying to keep anything like that from happening again. Now, the guidelines that have been established after these some of these horrific events are summarized in this section and sort of laid out on the next page, summarized in the Belmont report. You'll see this, and it will sort of guide you to what came out of that in Table 4.3. So think about that and what a task it would be to try to establish guidelines that would allow good research in health and medicine, but at the same time protecting all those involved in it. So on the bottom of page 79, you'll see the 6 issues or the 6 questions that human subject research is put up against. And these are explained over the next column. So you should be able to explain these 6 issues or these 6 standards and explain how they are used to evaluate medical health research. And then come up with the idea of your own thoughts of should we be this restrictive or in researching new cures and so on? What cost? What are the means and ends? How much of a risk should we take? But just remembering, we want to protect those, everyone involved in this research. Now we're looking at research in low and middle income countries, and that takes us down to page 81. We're almost through. This is sort of a short chapter, and this gets us into how we do research today and oversight. You'll see different things. Different boards are called different things. Here at ETSU, we have the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. That's our oversight committee that any research has to go through and be approved by that committee. I have highlighted in my text this first paragraph in talking about how do we meet everyone's needs. They use an easy example about a kidney. Who should get that? How do you decide who gets organs and so on? And then it talks about what we covered in Chapter 3, some tools to make those decisions. On the next page, it goes through different ways of distributing those limited resources, and they're again using the organ as the example, and it's the first come, first served. They also talk about a lottery might seem fair, and then notice down, talk about a weighted lottery. Really, how do you decide who what are those parameters you would put on that? And that's continued talking about scarce resources in these bullets here. And I'll highlight here the decision makers and how would you determine and what are the advantages of these different methods on how do we, I want to say ration care, but we really do that, right? We fund some programs and we don't fund some programs. So spend some time onto this and looking at the equality of it, the priorities for the worse off isn't also an issue, but the text goes and talks about covering the most people may not do the most good. Sometimes they use a urban to a rural setting, so make sure you pay some attention to that. And finally, we look at personal responsibility and how much should that weigh into the decision of who gets care. If you take certain risks yourself, if you know something is bad for your health and you participate in it, should you receive care? And if that's the case, who gets to make those decisions? If you smoke, should you receive health care for lung cancer? I'm a scuba instructor. I know that that is a risky activity. If I'm injured doing that, should I receive any kind of governmental care or support since I voluntarily engaged in that? So that's a decision, and I really encourage you to have your own decision and your own philosophy on that, but you really need to be able to explain both sides of the issue. From a public health standpoint, you have to be able to address those who fall on both sides of that. Kind of summing up this chapter, it admittedly talks about only scratching the surface for ethics and the distribution of care. And then looking at the future, how do we look at the future of limited resources, more need, greater technology available to a few? What are the future needs that you as public health students now are going to have to deal with in your career? So think about what you're going to be dealing with in the next 20 or 30 years as you close out the chapter. Okay, and that's it for Chapter 4. Thank you.